Who would Canada ask for help? When the US suddenly backed out in 2025, trade talks fell apart, cross-border deals were put on hold, and American customers left the table without notice. That's not simply stress. It's being cut off from the economy. So who stepped in when no one was watching? 10 countries, some expected and some utterly unexpected, discreetly stepped in to fill the gap and help Canada move forward. Deals were made in secret, and billions of dollars changed hands. New alliances developed virtually overnight, which nations made the largest advances. Who benefited the most from America's silence? Keep watching, because number 1 is the last country you would think could save Canada. Number 10. Mexico. Who saw this coming? Mexico quietly ramping up to catch Canada. When trade with the United States started sliding away in 2025, American tariffs on Canadian gear have tightened digital service. Tax retribution remains unresolved. Cross-border automobile production deals have started to break apart. How did Mexico become one of Canada's primary standby partners? In 2024 alone, Canada shipped about $30 billion United States dollars worth of goods to Mexico, making it Canada's third largest export market. And when things got tricky with the US in early 2025, that number did not only hold. It grew. Who would have expected that Mexico, long seen as a junior partner in North American commerce, would step up to fill the hole? How deep is this new relationship? Mexico's manufacturing industry relies largely on Canadian machinery, aluminum, and chemical exports. During the first quarter of 2025, Mexican importers moved north as American supply grew less reliable, and it was not just industry participants. Agriculture and IT businesses also begun sourcing more from Canada. Does that signify a quiet economic transformation in the region? How long will this new alignment last? With the United States growing more protectionist? Mexico and Canada are quietly reinforcing relationships that used to be secondary. Are we witnessing the early beginnings of a new North American cooperation that no one expected? Some trade experts feel so, and the numbers are beginning to corroborate that idea. Who benefits more? Mexico receives a solid alternative to US exports, while Canada finds a constant buyer to mitigate the damage from American consequences. Does this trade balance tilt the scale away from US supremacy in North America? When the headlines focused entirely on US Canada conflicts, Mexico was quietly creating bridges instead of walls while others pushed back. Mexico leaned in and Canada replied. It may not reach the front page, but this expanding cooperation could be one of the most important economic stories of 2025. Number 9. China. Why would China, long considered as an adversary to Western nations, become one of the secret forces keeping Canada afloat in 2025? Trade tensions with the United States are at an all-time high. Major energy transactions with American firms have been postponed, and cross-border investment has slowed to a crawl. So why has China doubled in on Canada just when others pulled away? The first quarter of 2025, Canada's exports to China maintained stable at over $21 billion United States dollars, precisely when other worldwide markets were falling. What is China buying? Energy, machinery, and agricultural goods. Everything the US stopped ordering. Is this a political action or purely economic? Some observers feel China is using trade to extend influence, but for Canada it is simply a lifeline. Would you anticipate your fiercest competition to become your strongest supporter? In Canada's situation, that is exactly what happened. Number 8. Japan. Could Japan, a country thousands of kilometers across the Pacific, truly be one of the reasons Canada escaped economic disaster in 2025? The answer may surprise you, us. Trade relations with Canada are still tight, key pipeline projects involving American firms remain delayed, and Canadian agricultural exports are facing tougher controls from their closest neighbor. So when traditional avenues stopped, where did Canada look next toward Japan? A nation famed for clarity, consistency, and long-term economic thinking? During the first quarter of 2025, Canadian exports to Japan rose, especially in crucial industries including crude oil, liquefied natural gas, and wheat. Could this be more than simply a short-term spike? How does this cooperation actually work? Japan has limited natural energy supplies and has historically depended on steady imports. When global markets got volatile and the United States started limiting supply lines, Japan went to Canada not merely as a backup, but as a serious long-term supplier. Could this energy lifeline solidify Canada's place in East Asia's economic future? Is this transition solely about energy? Not at all. Japan's automotive and electronics sectors have boosted up their imports of Canadian minerals, forest products, and even chemical components used in semiconductors. Why would they turn to Canada instead of their normal European sources? Simple Canada remained constant, while others fluctuated. What about the political angle? Japan and Canada have quietly increased ties over the past 5 years, with mutual defense talks and cultural exchange programs bolstering economic collaboration. Could this be setting the framework for a formal Pacific Economic Pact that excludes the United States? How long will this silent partnership last? That depends on whether Canada maintains investing in the infrastructure needed to meet Japan's expanding demand. Energy terminals on Canada's Pacific coast, rail expansions inland, and greater port capacity are all in the works, but delays might endanger this momentum. When North America turned inward, Japan turned abroad and found a willing partner in Canada, while others focused on confrontation. Japan created bridges with plan and consistency, and Canada, it followed the opportunity discreetly but powerfully. Number 7. United Kingdom. Who would have guessed the United Kingdom, thousands of miles over the Atlantic, would be one of Canada's unexpected lifelines? In 2025, US-Canada digital tax cases remain unresolved. Cross-border energy infrastructure projects are blocked. Exporters are facing higher tariffs from their largest neighbor. How did Britain step in when things started going apart? In just the first quarter of 2025, Canadian exports to the United Kingdom surged by over 5%, while trade with the United States held steady, which industries experienced the highest boost? Think motor cars, metals, and crude oil? Does it herald a new approach for Canada's worldwide strategy? With post-Brexit Britain eager for stable trading partners, Canada filled a gap. Others ignored who benefited more in the long run. Canada or the UK, that equilibrium is still moving. But when usual allies closed doors, Britain gently opened one wide and Canada went in without hesitation. Hit the subscribe and like button before we move on, so you don't miss the juice. Number 6. Germany. May Germany, sitting in the heart of Europe, truly be playing a subtle but essential role in salvaging Canada's economy in 2025? US purchasers are pulling back on Canadian machinery. Cross-border tech cooperation have been placed on indefinite stop, and tariffs on Canadian metals are now beginning to hurt. So when the traditional markets began to shut down, which countries stepped in with astonishing speed and precision? Germany. Not only did Canadian exports to Germany maintain stable, they actually climbed by roughly 3% in the first quarter of 2025. What exactly are the Germans buying? Machinery, chemicals, raw materials, and specialized metals that go directly into their vast industrial engine? Why would Germany shift to Canada in a time of uncertainty? With US-European trade having its own problems, German manufacturers needed new, trusted partners. Canada gave exactly that: constant quality, stable pricing, and no political surprises. Is this solely about supply chains? Or might it be something more long-term? How is this shift playing out on the ground? German automakers have begun sourcing more Canadian parts for electric vehicle batteries. German construction firms are tapping into Canadian lumber again, and pharmaceutical companies are increasing purchases of Canadian biotech compounds. Could this be the beginning of a deeper economic alignment? Is there room to grow? Absolutely. With the European Union pressing for energy independence and industrial security, Germany is quietly establishing Canada as a valued outside partner. Free from the internal politics of the bloc, Canada offers an edge others cannot. Could thus undermine the conventional US-Germany trade relationship. If these numbers hold, and especially if the United States continues isolating itself, Canada might gradually push into deals that were formerly solely transatlantic. When Washington slammed the brakes, Berlin pressed the gas, and instead of retiring, Germany sought out to a country most wouldn't anticipate for Canada. This link delivers more than just short-term relief. It's a footing in Europe's biggest economy. While others saw crisis, Germany sensed opportunity and Canada answered the call. Number 5. Brazil might one of South America's most volatile economies actually become a vital participant in saving Canada's trade network in 2025. US customers are going inward with new domestic-first policy. Canada's mining exports to the United States have declined due to tougher environmental reviews, while cross-border energy cooperation has been delayed by overregulation and political standoffs. While all eyes were riveted on the usual allies, Brazil quietly became one of Canada's strongest fallback choices. In 2024, Canadian exports to Brazil surged 8%, totaling roughly $4 billion United States dollars. That trend maintained consistent in early 2025, with vital products including potash, wheat, aluminum, and mining equipment migrating south. Why would Brazil suddenly increase trade with a country hundreds of kilometers away? Brazil's burgeoning agricultural industry is eager for resources, fertilizers, minerals, and energy inputs, and Canada supplies all three. Could Canada be the secret enabler behind Brazil's food powerhouse position? And what about industrial growth? As Brazil increases infrastructure projects, Canadian companies are filling orders for tools, parts, and technology that US firms used to dominate? Could this shift herald a permanent change in Latin America's trade dynamics? While Canada's usual partners generated uncertainty, Brazil moved in with sustained demand. This is not simply a temporary remedy, it's a realignment in motion with every shipment. Brazil is helping Canada minimize its dependence on its closest neighbor. And for both countries, the benefits are starting to speak louder than the politics ever could. Number 4. India. What happens when a fast-growing superpower like India quietly becomes one of Canada's most trustworthy trading partners? In 2025, the United States is reducing back its agricultural imports. Cross-border energy projects are caught in political limbo, and large US customers are shifting contracts to domestic providers. With doors closing on one side, India opened a window and Canada stepped through it fast. In 2024, Canadian exports to India climbed by 12%, hitting about $3 billion United States dollars. By early 2025, that momentum ramped up again with pulses, fertilizers, and energy items leading the surge. Could India be altering the global trade map while no one's looking? Why would a country with over 1 billion people turn to Canada of all places? The answer rests in reliability as India pushes for food security, clean energy expansion, and infrastructural growth. It needs trusted partners, not ones locked in terror conflicts and political deadlock. Could this demand for consistency make Canada more valuable than even regional suppliers? How broad is this commerce link becoming? Canada is already supplying India with everything from potash and uranium to innovative farming equipment and forestry products. That's not simply buying and selling, it's strategic partnership. Could this lead to a long-term alliance between two democracies with common objectives and stability and growth? What's in it for Canada beyond numbers? Market diversity for starters. India affords Canadian exporters access to a vast consumer base, one that's continually increasing. And unlike the saturated US market, India's desire for Canadian goods is rising year after year. Could this suggest India may one day challenge the United States as Canada's biggest trade partner? What makes this story even more surprising? India and Canada were on uncertain diplomatic ground just months ago. Yet as political headlines focused on conflicts, economic transactions quietly went on. It's proof that trade doesn't always wait for politics to catch up. As the US pulled away, India leaned in, not loudly, but with attention and urgency. Canada noticed. Now this growing relationship is changing Canada's economic future. More than most people realize, disregard the headlines, watch the trade data. That's where the true tale is being written. Number 3. Netherlands. How did one of Europe's tiniest countries become one of Canada's largest supporters throughout a worldwide economic shakeup in 2025? US ports are clogged and overregulated. Canadian exports to American buyers are slowing down due to tighter digital tax standoffs. Investment inflows from the US have fallen for 2 straight quarters. While stronger economies hesitated, the Netherlands quietly opened its doors. Canadian exports to the Dutch market climbed by nearly 4% in the first quarter of 2025, a remarkable performance considering the worldwide recession. How does a little country produce such a tremendous impact? The answer lies in logistics. The Netherlands operates one of the most advanced shipping and trade networks in the world, and the Port of Rotterdam, the largest in Europe, has become a new gateway for Canadian goods entering the continent, which Canadian industries are benefiting the most: energy, automotive parts, and agriculture. Canadian liquefied natural gas is moving gradually into the Netherlands. As Europe turns away from Russian supply, Dutch automakers and equipment businesses are now looking to Canada for specialty parts. Could this imply a long-term trade corridor that bypasses conventional powerhouses? How much impact does the Netherlands truly possess in Canada's economic shift? More than most people think? By functioning as a vital entry point into the European Union, the Netherlands is magnifying Canada's reach across the continent. Does this offer Canada leverage it did not have before? Without a question, every container that passes through Rotterdam enhances Canada's footprint. Far beyond Dutch boundaries, are these merely short-term data or part of a wider trend? Early indicators imply the latter. New agreements between Canadian exporters and Dutch logistics providers are being signed through 2026. Multinational firms are now using Dutch warehouses as their staging ground for Canadian goods. While everyone's eyes are on Washington, a quiet shift is unfolding in Western Europe. The Netherlands isn't simply buying from Canada. It's making Canada a player in a much broader game. When the normal routes closed, the Dutch gave a new one and Canada took it without hesitation. Number 2. South Korea. Who would imagine South Korea, a country typically ignored by its larger neighbors, to become one of Canada's greatest trading lifelines in 2025? American tariffs on Canadian IT components remain in force. Cross-border operations between Canada and the United States are still encountering substantial slowdowns, and U.S. demand for Canadian-produced goods continues to fall. Month after month, when other markets faltered, South Korea did something few saw coming. It stepped up throughout the first quarter of 2025. South Korean imports of Canadian industrial machinery and technology-related commodities climbed by over 10%. What made this spike so different? Unlike earlier years where South Korea focused on Chinese or Japanese suppliers, it now leaned into Canadian precision and reliability. Could this stealthy pivot foreshadow a lasting realignment? Which industries are fueling this new bond? South Korea's semiconductor and automotive sectors, both in overdrive, have begun purchasing more raw materials and machine tools from Canada. How does Canada compete in such a high-stakes industry through constant supply, high-quality inputs, and a reputation for stability during international disruptions? Could Canada become South Korea's go-to provider for tech infrastructure? How deep is this economic alliance going? Canada is increasingly playing a larger part in Korea's clean energy objectives, providing crucial resources like lithium and cobalt for electric battery development. Could this partnership place Canada at the core of Asia's energy future, and more importantly, who else is paying notice? Might this new intimacy also be geopolitical? With both countries apprehensive of increased instability in U.S. policy and shaky Western allies, trade has quietly become a strategic link. South Korean companies are signing longer-term contracts with Canadian firms lasting into 2026 and beyond. How far will this tendency stretch? While U.S. ties remain volatile, South Korea is choosing allies it can count on, and Canada has proven to be one of them. This cooperation is not just about trade figures, it is about trust. As others turned their backs, South Korea leaned in, looking past the clamor and discovering real value in Canada's quiet strength. And for Canada, that trust may turn out to be one of its most important assets in the global economy. 1. Australia. When did Australia become one of Canada's most important trade partners? And why is no one talking about it? US demand for Canadian forestry products is declining fast, cross-border business initiatives are being halted with no clear resume, and digital trade agreements with Washington are still mired in political gridlock. While everyone concentrated on collapsing ties with the United States, Australia secretly substantially increased its imports from Canada in 2024. Trade between the two exceeded about $2 billion United States dollars by early 2025. That number climbed by another 10%. Which sectors are generating this unexpected interest? Forestry, chemicals, and innovative industrial supplies? Could this be more than a short-term shift? Australia's increasing construction boom and mining industries rely significantly on foreign resources. Canada has become a go-to supplier. Are we seeing the early steps of a deeper Pacific alliance? How long can this momentum last? As both governments face increased pressure to lessen reliance on the US and China, direct commerce between Canada and Australia is starting to look less like a backup plan and more like a strategy. In a world full of shifting alliances, Australia didn't hesitate and Canada delivered quietly but powerfully. When the United States stepped back, these 10 countries stepped in, and Canada didn't simply survive. It adapted. Covert transactions, new alliances, and unexpected trade partners transformed everything. If you found this eye-opening, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more unseen stories shaping the globe right now.